Hello and assalamu alaikum to all our lovely audience in Lahore. We are very happy to be joining WOW 2025 from the UK and the United States. Joining me today on the panel are Mallory Nodal, who's a technologist and human rights expert from the US, and Hira Hussain, founder and CEO of Chan, a global nonprofit. Welcome to the panel. So, this conversation today is very close to my heart, and this is a great opportunity for all of us to talk about how women and young girls can engage in AI software, programming, development, and integrate it more and more into their lives. This is going to be an interactive conversation. Feel free to jump in where you want, but I'll start the conversation with you, Mallory. In the context of South Asia, how do we increase the participation of women in decision making in artificial intelligence?
Thanks so much for inviting me to this session. It's really great to be talking to you both about this today. I am a general purpose technologist, have mostly been self-taught. And so I'm kind of an example of someone who will get involved in sort of any technical thing that's out there. I think we can't leave it up to those who have the privilege and the time to elect to spend time playing with new tech, even if it's touted as being fully democratic and very accessible online. We know those things are not true. I think there are inequalities we have to confront. And so when we think about getting more folks involved from wherever that is in technology, it's important to imagine the shifting of power in that effort. So I think that certainly education can play a role, but it isn't the only thing. I think there has to be real reasons why young women should get involved in playing with different technologies. So it could be for work, right? It could be for organizing. It could be for creativity. Hopefully it's for joy as well. And so I think we'll see an increase in integration of certain AI and technology we're already using. And I think that as well, the quality of that integration, the quality of how well the technology works, whether it's used for predicting or if it's used for generation, like generating text, generating images, generating ideas. That's what a lot of the most recent democratized AI looks like these days. The quality is going to vary, and I think it varies. The research shows it varies by language. It certainly varies by region, and that improves with more people using it. But it also then gets used more if, it's been integrated into the technology we already want to use. So I think it's a complicated question that you're asking, Rama, and I think that the answer as well is equally complicated. But I just hope that, creators and developers in these regions can integrate these AI technologies into technology that's already being used by populations like young women in Pakistan and Southeast Asia, so that you find it actually truly useful and truly creative. That's, I think, the most the important thing to remember.
Thank you, Mallory. Mallory spoke about democratic technology and it being accessible to everyone. How important do you think that is?
I think it's really important. First, thank you so much for having me as well. And it's great to speak to an audience in Lahore, which is where I grew up. So it's amazing to be joining you through the internet. What makes this conversation really interesting for South Asia and Pakistan is that we are actually very technology adept. So we have a huge interest and excitement around technology. I work globally now, and I can tell you there are lots of countries where that excitement doesn't exist, and there's a lot more skepticism. But that's not a problem that Pakistan and generally South Asia has. In fact, South Asia as a region is one of the biggest adopters and users of internet, if you look at the population. But there's a huge gender divide. So the democratization of technology is important because there is a huge gender divide, and you cannot have half of your population simply based on their gender not being able to access that. In Pakistan के केस में बहुत सारी ख़वातीन के पास कभी मोबाइल आता ही नहीं क्योंकि उनके घर वाले उनको नहीं देते या उनको अपने भाई या अब्बू का मोबाइल शेयर करना पड़ता है तो डिवाइस ओनरशिप is a big problem in Pakistan. So part of democratization is actually access. So first thing is having access. तो औरतों के पास वो access होना चाहिए, बच्चियों के पास वो access होना चाहिए. In fact, there's research that like the when you look at the internet usage amongst boys, it is if you look at Nepal, twice as much of boys use internet in Nepal than girls. And that's 4 times more boys in Pakistan use internet than girls. So there is a huge gender divide. तो हमें इसको tackle करना चाहिए because unless women have access to it, that's like the absolute like basic of democratization. And the second thing is the access affordable? तो क्या इंटरनेट की स्पीड, क्या इंटरनेट की कॉस्ट, क्या टेक्नोलॉजी की कॉस्ट, क्या वो अफोर्डेबल है, क्या हम उसको मतलब वो किन किन किस तरह के तबकों के लिए उनका उसका इख्तियार करना आसान है या इवन पॉसिबल है. तो वो that is a very important conversation because a lot of the excitement around technology is limited to sort of middle class, upper middle class, wealthy people. And it makes sense because they can afford it, they have access to it, they are able to apply it for jobs, for industry. But for a nation which is one of the biggest users of social media websites, which is, Pakistan is a great example of how social media has been truly has played a democratic role in the country. TikTok se leke YouTube tak, we have huge take up. WhatsApp, all of these things. That shows us that that access part can be done. पर हम उसको कैसे equalize करेंगे in terms of women having access to it, women being able to afford it, and then the third thing which Mallory spoke about, how can women be not just consumers but creators as well? So you don't just go on YouTube to watch a video. Supporting women, one of my favorite things to do is to watch sort of village accounts on YouTube and TikTok from women in Pakistan. It's amazing. And actually, not just in Pakistan, I watch them in women in Iran. I watch them from, women in India. It's just really, really interesting. And that is an example of women actually being part of the creation process. But then it's going a step further, which is, okay, fine, we are using existing technology, we are becoming creators on it. But then the last step is how are we actually creating the tech? So it's not just like creating on tech, but actually being part of the creation process in tech. And that's when we get into, the industry. Are women actually being given opportunities to build technologies, to invent? And that is a much bigger conversation. And that is also part of democratization, because if all technology is created by men, then it is going to be fit for men. It's going to be, you're going to lose out not on just the bias element which exists when you have like one group designing for everybody, especially when you're in a society where there is a huge sexism and misogyny. But uske alawa, you just lose out on ideas. You lose out on great ideas that could exist.
Thank you so much, Hira. And that it's so interesting that you say that. But the thoughts that come to me is that the perception that is built around technology is interesting. For me, I want to look into what roles the media is playing, what role perhaps the civil society is playing, what role influencers are playing, and how do you think we can make this more encouraging for women and young girls in South Asia? So, Malis, Hira spoke about having more women as creators at the helms of affairs, as we say, and that's where the change comes in. How do we change this perception? Do we make use of the media, or do we have more people like yourself and Hira in the spotlight, which encourages more women and young girls? How do we push back on the perception that AI is being made perhaps by men predominantly, and also to that statement, is it being made by men predominantly? Is there some truth to what is being perceived?
Well, I would say that there's a lot of narrative is often controlled by men. There's no question about that. It's also very Western, of course. We're used to this in tech. I think it's been over normalized. So we should push back and we should tell stories when they exist. So I will tell one brief story, which is that computer vision and image generation is actually all owed to a woman who is at Princeton University, who worked on something called ImageNet. Many years ago, sort of in the neural net version of AI. So we have a woman to thank for the advances in computer vision that have led to generation. There are loads of women who've worked in also language, natural language processing, and other things. So it has been a very collective effort. There's no, one founder of AI. So we can be sure that, education and research institutions have included women's perspectives. We also know, because you brought up social media, that those spaces are often dominated by women and content creators, in specific niche areas. So that is all part of the story of both generative and sort of predictive AI. And I think that this is a great question. Like, how can these different sectors and the work that's done also from a feminist perspective lead to then implementations and usage of AI that is feminist as well? I think that's a really smart way of thinking of this. So if it's, media and journalism, that is absolutely driven AI. Knowledge production in general has all fed into these large language models that we see as being implemented in very general ways. So the sort of, chat GPTs and llamas, those are large foundational models that have scooped up all kinds of content. Then you have the general models can be applied in more specific ways. So that's also a domain specific area that we can break up by sector and think of, what are already the efforts to have more women engaged in these spaces, and then that will lead to usage and implementation of these models. So, maybe an example is the state, in fact. So governments wanting to deliver more social services and more kinds of things using the digital public infrastructure framework or other kinds of implementations of AI, that's absolutely going to require every citizen, men and women, to have to engage with these tools. And as Hara said, it would be totally unacceptable if only 50% of the population had the capacity to do that. So, the state has to be invested in making sure that these tools are accessible and usable, or they themselves will not be able to expect others to use them as well. We've already talked about media. Education is another one. So education, if there will be any kind of technical tool delivery integrated into education, both in person and then increasingly the use of remote platforms for education, these are going to have to be accessible. They're going to have to be equitable. Certainly, they have been created to be so, but I think that to empower more engagement means that experts in education, people who have dedicated their lives to these sectors that are now leveraging AI, they can be sure that their expertise can be applied, that they can be experts in this, that they can help they can help develop these more specific AI models, these more specific AI applications that are within their area of expertise. So you don't have to feel like you have to learn a brand new thing. Like, what you're already doing, what you're already expert in, is enough. And to really shape the way your sector develops to use these tools is one way to empower and expand use of these AI tools.
So Mallory, that's very encouraging to know. And we been part of this movement to encourage more women and young girls to be a part of technology, be more have more access to education, have more access to opportunities. But a lot of times we come across this hesitancy or this fear of going out there into a space where they face abuse or possible harassment. Hira, how do you feel we can safeguard into this, ecosystem that's ever evolving, where there are challenges like deep fakes or, identities being taken away?
Thank you. That's a really good question. And I think that I'm going to answer your question in two ways. One is the first part of your question was about how women feel hesitant when sort of like entering tech spaces, to kind of to work in them. So I'll answer that question first, and then I'll move on to the second question about part of the question, which is more about, what is the harm that we're seeing around gender-based violence, violence against women, around AI. So in terms of, tech spaces being male dominant, that is a harsh reality in most countries. I remember when I was I had just graduated from university, and my in Pakistan, my impression was that yes, tech is a male dominant space. I actually This is a funny story, but I was the only girl in like my mother when I was growing up, she would send us to like summer courses every every summer holidays. She was like, "Go be busy." So I did a course or the other, and she wanted me to do useful courses, not just art courses and music. So she would send me to like useful courses. So the first course she sent me to when I was 8 years old, I think, was a typing course. So I was the youngest person there doing this typing class, and it was all women. It was at a women's center, so it makes sense. It was at a Behbood center in Lahore. And yeah, I did that. I was the youngest person there, loved it, very practical. Then the next year, she was like, okay, let's, you like computer stuff. I was the printer whisperer in our house. So she was like, do some of the computer course. So I decided I had a choice of doing between a sort of software development course, and this is, I think I'm 9 or 10 at this point, or I could do a course on hardware. And I was talking to someone, like, so we went to this computer skills center, and I was talking to the sort of the owner or the manager there, and he was like, most girls will do the software development one. You're still very young, you're a kid, but okay, you want to do it, sure. And then there's the hardware one, which I think was C, I forget, I think it was a C plus. I don't know what it was. It was a very hardware specific course. And he was like, only men do that. And again, I'm in 9 or 10, and I was like, फिर तो मैंने यही करना है. तो मैंने अपनी अम्मी से कहा कि मैं ये करूंगी. मामा ने कहा ठीक है. So I went and did the hardware course, and everybody around me was like an uncle for me. I was so like tiny, like and everybody else was like in their like late 20s, 30s, 40s. And I passed the course. I got great marks. But it's just an example of like the gender divide when it comes to like, so the secretarial course was all women, the hardware course was all men. So I've always been really interested in tech. So when I was in the UK, I was like, okay, my impression was the UK's like tech space was going to be a lot more gender diverse. And it kind of wasn't. It's definitely more gender diverse in Pakistan, but it still isn't as gender diverse as you would like it. So those issues of harassment and coming across really sexist behavior, I've seen it all in the UK as well, and I hear similar stories from women in Pakistan. These barriers are things that absolutely exist, and also the responsibility of tackling them is not on women. It's on the CEOs and the HR departments of places, the co-working spaces, co-working spaces actually have a lot of power because they are giving space to companies, and though they're not running those companies, they get to set the culture for their physical space. And I think they are also like a lever. Investors are another really important. I hear some not great stories about investors in Pakistan who don't seem to care about the gender makeup of companies. They don't seem to care about like sexual harassment allegations and like how they're dealt with. So all of these things and all these power players are important in making spaces feel safe. And then also educational institutions. If most people entering tech are men, and men seem to be the problem, creating the harassment and harassing atmospheres and sexist sort of technologies and languages, then they should be taught. They should be targeted for the education. So as part of their educational process, why are they not taught about both a code of conduct? So as Mallory mentioned, there's so many amazing women who have been inventors of tech, all the way from image recognition technology, which is a recent example, to much older examples of code breaking technologies, the development of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. Women have had a huge part in it. Technology that has taken us to the moon, all of that stuff, that needs to be taught as well. So many times I've heard the expression, both in my family or my friends when I was in school in Pakistan, all the way to like startups in the UK, where the comment goes something like, women's brains are not meant for this, you're better at like the marketing jobs, the events jobs, and like the
Yeah.
community
Well,
management jobs.
be the face of something rather than.
Exactly. And it's fine. I was the events person actually. And they were saying it to me, and I was like, you're right. I am that person in a tech company where most of my male, like developer colleagues are male, and I'm the person representing the other side. But I also knew a lot of women coders who were there and who were working. So, and now I run a tech nonprofit, and all of our tech team is made up of women. So, it's that just doesn't work. So that's the first, just responding to your first question. The second part is around, what are the harms that we're seeing around gender-based violence and AI? And that is a really important and timely conversation because, like any medium, technology is a medium, and the gender-based violence that we see in person all the way from, cat calling, किसी को छेड़ना सड़क पे, हाथ लगाने की कोशिश करना, किसी के साथ जबरदस्ती करना, किसी को गाली धमकियां देना. All of these things that we see in person are replicated online, but the scale of it is a lot bigger. And an example that I often give is sending if you're walking down the street, especially in a place like Pakistan, we have such a large population. This is very unlikely to happen, and it's rare, but it does happen. If you're walking in a crowded street, the cost for a man to remove their trousers and expose themselves to you is so high. Police could catch them, other people could see it, they might get beaten up, there's a lot of social cost around it. Same thing doing something like that online. You just
Unsolicited
send that
images,
image,
yeah.
you can send it to hundreds of women, and no one does anything about it. So the actually your chances of getting away with something like that are so high. So because of that, this almost impunity that we see. And in Pakistan, just in this year, we've had examples of celebrities being targeted by
Politicians.
yeah, unclothing apps, by we have politicians, exactly, very high ranking politicians, female politicians, who are in the sort of the ruling party, the opposing party, have had their these forged sex tapes made of them, these forged indecent videos made of them. A few 10 years ago, 20, I would say, yeah, even 10 years ago, the technology that allowed you to take your face and put it on Shah Rukh Khan's face as he's dancing, on the hills of Switzerland, you could still tell it was Shah Rukh Khan, but you just put someone's face on it.
Yeah, but
That
now it's
technology
become
is
more
so much more
sophisticated.
sophisticated. Exactly. It's harder to tell apart. Voice is so much easier to manipulate as well because you don't have any visual cues. तो आपको लगता है कि क्या पता वाकई उन्होंने ये कहा हो, क्या पता वाकई ये हुआ हो. Actually, the critical thinking skills are critical thinking things are absolutely being tested right now, and women are, especially in South Asian cultures, there's just the shadow of a doubt is enough to ruin a woman's life, all the way from them being restricted from not going out, not seeing their friends, not completing their education, not pursuing education, not doing their job, not being able to continue a job, all the way to physical violence, being forced off to marriage, and death. All of this has happened in Pakistan. And this is a lived reality for women. So, this kind of sort of technology is really dangerous. I work again on, when it comes to deepfakes, I work on it globally, and I raise these points from South Asian perspective all the time, because while a lot of the things that I've mentioned are just as harmful in other cultures, the community around them might shame, might victim blame, but the communities are not so easily charged to actually physically harm the victim in this case. But in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, we see this is a real, Afghanistan, this is a real problem. Even if
I,
people
I also
know
I
something
also
is fake.
feel like, Hira, like a lot of times I've experienced that the notion of honor is somehow placed, in my body, in my agency, in my movement,
Yeah.
in my choice. And that really has such a negative impact on my choices, or even the fact that on my decision, on my everyday decision, like you said, to pursue a career, to pursue education. I do want and I do hope that things change in this respect. But I do feel, like you said, that, we're so quick and we're so emotionally driven and charged, like a mob mentality, that we're quick to kind of respond to something without thinking too much into it. And I see like these cases where women have been abused domestically, they've been hit, they've been murdered just because of a perceived notion, of dishonor that she has brought upon to her family. Along the same lines, Mallory, if I could ask you, Hira's talked about raising this issue internationally. How do you feel regulatory bodies or social media, organizations can safeguard women or those that are maybe sort of weakened or vulnerable in this situation? And what is the world doing at large, to protect those that are threatened by this?
It's such a good question to think of this as a global problem, because these are global technologies, or they, at least they design themselves or publicize themselves to be global. We've heard for many years that Mark Zuckerberg of Meta thinks of Facebook as a global village, right? I trouble that notion. In fact, I think that it isn't really, I think that these large platforms that we've been using for the last 10 years or so are not truly global. We know that they are imbued with the values of where they come from, more so than the places where they're used. I think that the democratization of AI and also this changing climate of regulation means that we will have more fit for purpose platforms, right? Like there are going to be fewer one size fits all platforms. I think that's really great. It's great for local innovation. It's also better for smart regulation that can do things like protect folks based on the norms of a locality or the laws of certain jurisdictions. I will say that I think the answer is somewhere in between, though, of course, right? Because I also, I lived in Canada for many years. I also lived in Kenya. I know that the world is still global, right? We might sort of think of communities as being very monolith in their sort of origin, but we have huge diaspora all over the world. And so I think that that can really help with this cross-pollination of, fit for purpose regulation, of understanding our neighbors better, despite the fact that we all come from totally different places. Because at the end of the day, it is important to understand what are these pressures, what are these cultural practices, how does it affect people differently? So I feel like we've been in a real, it's been a depressing last decade when it comes to how content moderation has evolved, how local regulation has evolved. You also have some regulations because of this one size fits all system that are not good, right? Countries, governments would rather block entire platforms, right, than be able to craft regulation around them. But that's because the platforms have been really inaccessible and not responsive to the needs of local communities. We've had some really awful examples of this, right? Like the Rohingya genocide, which continues to this day. And yes, at some point, Meta got smarter about its role in that, but it hasn't been resolved, right? And we know social media is still a problem for that community, as it is for many, many others. So I think where AI comes in, we are beyond these rose-colored glasses where AI is going to be able to understand this nuance and it's going to be able to solve all of these really tricky content moderation problems. We know the opposite is actually true. The opposite is that what is really true is that AI is less discerning and even more of a sort of caricature of human decision making. It can't understand nuance. It's really challenged by satire, irony, context. Even the word no or saying the opposite thing can sometimes trip up sort of large
Especially in
language models.
non-European languages, because most of the AI is trained on European languages, right? So that is a big problem for it, which is why human content moderators are so important. And Mallory will know that there's been a lot of tech companies have actually cut their budgets for human moderators, and there's sort of teams that were based in different parts of the world, which was a big win for us when they started actually investing in local teams, because we were like, good, things are going to get better in terms of the cases. So yeah, just wanted to add that because I think it's a really important point, right?
It's absolutely right. I mean, all the research shows that even the tech companies, when they do attempt to have multiple language access, the technical methods for achieving that localization in language are subpar, and they almost always use English as a sort of fixed baseline. So there are real opportunities to build like fully trained in certain languages, right? I think there's one open large language model that's completely trained on Arabic, for example. That could be the case for a variety of different languages. But then we get into this accessibility issue of like not everything should be language based. A lot of languages aren't even written languages. But the same kinds of models are built for things like images, right? To do image recognition of objects across different cultures. It's all kind of categorized or classified in English and then retranslated out into other languages. Like that's inefficient, right? We should be thinking about different ways of innovating. So there's big gaps there for anyone interested in the research side of this. And then I think, I've said this many times already, but the opportunity to then innovate and apply smaller contexts, right? So moving away from the one size fits all into the fit for purpose applications, platforms, and so on. Like that's the opportunities are endless. And I think that's where people who are interested in being part of the creation of this can really create impressive feedback loops to make these AI tools much better and much more specific. And that can be a double-edged sword potentially if it sort of meets the moment culturally. That can also go both ways, right? It depends on who's then in control of that. And it can be even risky if the government is completely in control of it. We know governments are not always acting in everyone's best interest equally, right? So I think there's care needed. Also, we can rely on the experts that are local, the experts that are in our local universities that are helping us understand exactly, where has this training data come from? How has this model been constructed? Where is it being applied, and trace back then where harms are occurring, how we can undo those more easily. That's far easier to do than when you have just, 2 or 3 global models that are foundational to every other AI. Like that's not the model we should be happy with, and we should be thinking about more and more specific applications.
If I may, Mallory, you and I have talked about safeguarding ourselves against threats that technology or social media platforms can present. Is there any tip that you can give women how they can be more careful or stay more informed when placing anything online, the images or videos or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it is important to understand that anything we post online could potentially wind up being used in a model, or someone could use that content to manipulate that using AI. That's certainly a thing. I think that it's truly important to not place too much of a burden on people to protect themselves. I think that's, as a digital security expert, that was something I did for many years, was teaching individual activists, journalists, and so on how to stay safe online. I think there's a limit to that tactic because it's a one-to-one change. And I now work kind of at a higher level, which is, can we change the way these technologies work for everyone? Can we create norms and create responsibilities and obligations for stakeholders to, ensure human rights in the functioning of these technologies for everyone? But certainly, I think there's a lot of ways to get smart about how we use technology to make sure that they are safe for everyone. And then there's a sort of middle way as well, which is that these technologies can also be used to help the problem. So, for example, we were kind of talking a little bit around deep fakes, or the pervasive of this, how risky they can be. Like even if there's a shadow of a doubt, you said, right, that someone that can really affect them. There are now increasing tools out there that can help detect deep fakes, and it's certainly going to be a kind of cat and mouse game. One deepfake tool can advance, and then the detection of that tool can also advance, but then back again, the deepfake technology progresses and so on and so forth. But I think that that's another place. This is the sort of, everyone is protective of their own safety. We change the technology for everyone. And the middle path is that we think of creative solutions to counter this with the technology itself. And I think that when it's victim or marginalized community driven to develop these tools and solutions, they tend to be much better and more effective. And so that's another thing that I hope inspires folks, is to think about what are some ways that we can use the technology also to counter some of these harmful effects, and do so in a very empowered and integrated way.
Yeah. I love how you it's really interesting that you said that, we shouldn't all be responsible for everything that stands out there. And I think that's my built-in response as a woman, or, who wants to do it all, hyper independence and all of that. And we struggle with that all the time when we're like, okay, what can I do? Whereas, seldom are we thinking what systems are in place, what's the state is doing to help us, or the international organization or society at large. Hira, the theme for this year is सुरखाब के पर, और ये कहा जाता है कि क्या हमें लगे हैं, क्या हम इतने स्पेशल हैं कि हम इस चीज को, do we deserve what we have? How do you think we can also kind of work with accepting the amazing things we do every day? जैसे कि अभी what Mallory said to me is really making me rethink how I look at stuff. So how can we kind of challenge this inbuilt thing to, okay, हम औरतें हैं, let me be responsible for everything under the sun and let me take care of this.
एक औरत होने के नाते से इट्स आई थिंक इट्स नेचुरल, क्योंकि अगर आप अपने इर्द गिर्द लोगों पे आपको ये बताया जाए कि आपको, या आपको अपने सारे काम करने, औरों के सारे काम भी करने, सारी जिम्मेदारियां आपके ऊपर हैं, लेकिन जब बात आती है आपके फ्यूचर की, आपकी जॉब की, आपके पैसे कमाने की, आपकी पढ़ाई की, आपकी खुशियों की, जो चीज़ें आपकी खुशियों के लिए इंट्रिंसिक होती हैं, तो उसकी जिम्मेदारी जो है ना, वो आपके घर के आदमियों के हवाले होती है, वो आपके लिए वो फैसले मेक करेंगे। तो मुझे लगता है उसके लिए बहुत नेचुरल रिस्पॉन्स है दैट वी वांट टू रिक्लेम दैट एंड वी से व्हाट कैन आई डू, एंड स्पेशली
Yeah.
when you're facing such large levels of violence and discrimination. I never blame women for wanting to do something about it, to like help themselves. But I
Yeah.
think that's like a natural response. But then, like Mallory said, it's also about what is everybody else doing, who really should be doing it. तो जहां तक बात सुरखाब के पर की है, उस पर मैं ये कहूंगी कि ये पर हम सबके पास है। पैदाइशी पैदाइशी परों के साथ हम हम बढ़ते हैं, लेकिन ये हमारे इर्द गिर्द के जो लोग हैं वो आहिस्ता आहिस्ता उसको नोचना शुरू कर देते हैं। तो जो हम कर सकते हैं वो ये कर सकते हैं, अपने आप को याद कराएंगे ये पर हमें जो ना कुदरत की तरफ से मिले हैं, और ये हम सब में हैं, एंड इट लुक्स डिफरेंट फॉर एवरीबडी। किसी की लाइफ का मकसद ये हो सकता है कि दे वांट टू बी अ होम मेकर, दे वांट टू हैव अ फैमिली, दे वांट टू रेज देयर चिल्ड्रन इन द बेस्ट वे पॉसिबल, एंड दैट्स देयर सोर्स ऑफ प्राइड, एंड how they like decorate their house. There's nothing wrong with that, and for some people it might be that actually I just want to, I want to be a writer, I want to create apps, I want to do whatever. I think these are all like ये जो desires है ना, हमारी जो तमन्नाएं हैं, ये इनका गला हमें घोटना चाहिए, क्योंकि और बहुत लोग हैं वो जो घोटने के लिए तैयार होते हैं। So we should remember that we have a right to this, and often जब ये phrase हमें ये कहा जाता है, ये तब कहा जाता है जब आप अपनी ख्वाहिश का इजहार कर रहे होते हैं कि मैं
Hmm.
ये क्यों नहीं कर सकती, या मैं, मेरे साथ ये क्यों हो रहा है, या मैं बाहर क्यों नहीं जा सकती, तो फिर आपको आगे से ये कहा जाता है, या मैंने उससे शादी नहीं करनी, या मैं इस जॉब पे क्यों नहीं मैं
या बड़े
इस
होके ये
एग्जैक्ट जगह पे
बनूंगी,
क्यों।
या ये मेरी ख्वाहिशात हैं जो मुमकिन नहीं लगती।
एग्जैक्टली exactly. तो वो आपकी जो, जब कोई आपकी ख्वाहिश के इजहार करने पे ये कहे, लाइक दैट शुड बी अ फ्लैग फॉर यू टू बी लाइक, that is about them, that response is about them, and it's not about me. We have every right to safety, to freedom, to self-determination, to expression, to happiness. I feel like ये जो लफ्ज़ है happiness का, इंग्लिश में खुश रहना, अपनी ज़िंदगी से पुरइत्मीनान रहना। मैंने अपनी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का नाम चैन रखा था, क्योंकि आई फील लाइक औरतों की ज़िंदगी में चैन नहीं होता। तो आई वांट टू वर्क ऑन दिस कि औरतों को चैन मिले। ये सारे लफ्ज़ हैं, ये हमारा हक है, और इसको दुनिया छीनने की बहुत कोशिश करती है, लेकिन द वन थिंग that nobody can touch, and I always tell this to women, irrespective of what they're going through, the one thing nobody can touch is what's inside. And people will try and try to break you from the inside, but within us, we need to know that we deserve all the good things.
I love that as a message. And I think we are questioning ourselves, we are doubting ourselves or our abilities or the power that we hold within ourselves. And I think the wear and tear, like you said, पर नोचना, वो इतने नोचे जाते हैं कि एक point बिल्कुल ऐसा आता है that you second guess, you doubt yourself. And I love the message that you just shared with us. Mallory, very quickly, if someone's interested in artificial intelligence in Pakistan, what is the first few steps you'd recommend? How do they, start this journey, this relationship with technology and artificial intelligence from like a very intermediate or, point of view.
Absolutely. Well, for better or worse, the AI is coming. It's in a lot of search engines, it's in a lot of apps increasingly. So there's opportunity to play with it and to enjoy it. I think we should be excited about the joyful applications of it as much as we are worried about the threats. So I'm someone who I think that this is the similar to the democratization of the internet. We should really embrace it and try to shape it as much as we can. So use what's already out there. In addition, I can't tell you how overwhelming the content is online for online courses as well. There's a lot of folks, just everything from YouTube videos to more academic, open kinds of courses that you can take on just how to get started making little apps, right? Or like little integrations that, maybe can be fit for purpose for your domain. If you're a nonprofit, you could start thinking about how to optimize, certain tasks in that sense. I like to think that for me, the exciting part is when the AI can enhance what you're already doing rather than replace people or replace tasks, right? We're not trying to completely swap out different functionalities. The robots are not going to take our jobs, but they might make our jobs easier to do and less tedious, and that would be a really overall win. So that's kind of like a next step is to, take some education, take some classes that help you build something smaller. And then I think, there's a lot of folks to take that are interested in the next step, which is let's make them better, right? Let's think about how we can build something from the ground up that's better. We have some natural limits to the already big, I guess, right, models out there. So, ChatGPT, Llama, all of them have already been trained on and deployed with the available data out there. And we've already mentioned that it's overwhelmingly English. So there's some limits there. They're not going to necessarily improve in a lot of big and meaningful ways. Like they were launched and that was the big leap. The next big leap is going to come from elsewhere. It's got to either have completely different sources of data. It's got to have really different and interesting applications. And I think that for the most part, that innovation in the space where I exist in the West, in the English speaking world, has kind of reached its limit of so it's going to have to come from elsewhere, and I'm excited to see all of the different applications that come from Southeast Asia, in places where the populations are more different, and really huge, like huge potential for data. With
And I'd
those,
love to step in if I can give you some examples actually
oh,
from
sure,
South Asia of like AI use, because I think that might be an interesting thing. So
that'd be
one
great.
of my favorite examples actually comes from a startup in India called OpenAI. And what OpenAI does, Nyaya means justice in Hindi, and so it's an open justice platform, and also it has AI in it, so it's a nice play on words. And what they do is they have built natural language models based on. So India has hundreds of languages. It's actually one of the most language diverse countries in the world, and their application helps farmers and people who don't have sort of writing and reading literacy to use their their app, which uses their like language models in local languages to fill out government's bursary forms. So this could be for like agricultural grants, it could be for like, whatever government forms. And I just thought, what an interesting
Yeah.
example. That is a real innovation that's helping a lot of people. Chain itself, the non-profit that I run, we are also building a feminist AI, which is to support survivors in writing legal letters when it's around cases of domestic violence, sexual violence, tech abuse. And there's a couple of other, there's a really great organization in Argentina, and what they're doing is they're taking all the court sort of decisions and from this one, they started with one court because they knew like they were able to get to the judge. So they've and all the judgments are actually digitized in that region, which is great. I wish that was the same case in the UK, and it's not. But so they take the digitized judgments and they look for gender, they do gender analysis on it. So then they are able to share that data both with their Ministry of Justice and their judges to see how are you actually the same, like what kind of penalties are being given to women for the same crimes against men, what kind of things are you seeing. So they are able to do the analysis, which is really helpful for everybody who works in the sort of the legal reform or legal justice space. So like these are just a few examples. There are a lot more interesting ones coming through, and I just think these are things that I live for these examples because it's
Yeah,
just so great to see
yeah.
the different ways that it's being. Another one is in Brazil, and they're actually using AI to locate communities that are unmapped. They're not connected to the internet, so they supply them with internet connections, and then they use them and their AI model to actually map the parts of the geographical parts of Brazil. Brazil is huge that they don't know have much ecological data on, and that data is then available for everybody. So there's just a few examples. Another one I think is an example is less coming from it's like a big tech example, but I think Google Translate auto captioning is a great and a very exciting space because language depletion because of like the rise of English as a sort of international medium is a big problem for especially local dialects and languages. And it's really interesting how YouTube, for example, having auto captions available in so many languages, which is a completely AI driven initiative, has made so much content more available, both from the global south to the global north and vice versa.
Thank you so much, Hira and Mallory. I mean, I just feel like this is just a starting point to kind of delving deep into this conversation, and there's so much more. And I think by the time we go into 2026 and moving forward, there'll be so much more, as I'm understanding from what you're sharing today. Thank you so much for being with us. And before I end this conversation with you two, are there any lasting thoughts, last messages that quick messages you'd like to give?
No, thanks so much for having us. This has been a really interesting conversation for me as well. I learned a lot from you, Hera, and your questions, Rama, have been really great. I just think that, yeah, we haven't gotten into a lot of the harms. We talked a little bit about them, but there are so many more. And I actually think that's a bit refreshing. I'm hearing a lot of panic around AI, oh, what is it going to do? It's going to be such a problem. And I feel a little fatigued by all of that. And not that it isn't true. And I think there have been some excellent researchers who've broken down what those harms are and how we can address them. It's because there's so much potential. There's so much potential for folks to really become empowered by it and just creative, really like I'm just looking for the joy again, the creativity. Like I'm so bummed out by social media these days. It's just not always a nice place to be. And I miss, being able to go online and really enjoy what I'm seeing and feel that it's inclusive and it's diverse. And that people are having a good time. So maybe this is the future. At least I hope so. And I think it's up to the folks watching to take some inspiration from this and build really fun, exciting things. Thanks.
I love the optimism too, and I think that should be the approach moving forward because, like you said, we are constantly bombarded with how we can fear technology. So I love this new approach. What would you say, Hira?
I think Mallory covered it really well, and I feel very similarly. I have less of a message and more of a request for everybody in the audience. I'm always on the hunt for good examples of the use of AI from outside the West because I get to speak globally at different events. तो अगर कोई भी examples, कोई projects, कोई research, कुछ भी ऐसी चीज़ हो जो आपको लगता है कि दुनिया को उसके बारे में पता होना चाहिए, irrespective of what stage it's at, please do share it with us. You can find me on social media. It's just my name everywhere, and I would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, both of you. And from me, Ramachima, I'm signing off. We are going to now open to the audience's questions to these two wonderful individuals.